You know, the thing about being a Christian is you hear all kinds of things from all kinds of different quarters about Christianity, and some of them come from what you might even sort of term the least likely of places. And there was a philosopher and mathematician by the name of Blaise Pascal who advanced an idea that is referred to as Pascal's wager. And I want to talk a little bit about that today on the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. Hello, I'm your host. I'm Kurt. Today is Sunday, the 28th of February of 2021. Welcome to everyone who's here on Rumble, on the podcast, on YouTube. And again, the subject of today's little discussion will be Pascal's wager. And the thing about it is this: I've heard other people talk about this, but I want to bring some interesting ideas to light here. The very first of these that I want to bring to light is the idea that a person is not a believer and that in believing they are right. There is no God. That's what Pascal's wager says. Let's get that out of the way first, right? Because I haven't done that. I should do that, right? So basically, the idea behind Pascal's wager, what it says is there may be a God, there may not be a God, but it makes more sense to believe that there is a God because the benefit of believing that there is a God is greater than the loss that you have. In fact, some people argue that there is no loss that occurs if you believe that there is a God and there isn't one. But here's where I'd like to differ with a lot of people on that. And that's where I was talking about not being a believer and being correct in your assumption that there is no God. In that instance, you get to live the life you could argue that you really want to live, right? You're not living a life where you are sort of constrained by things that are unreasonable and unreal. So if you're not a believer, and you're right, technically, you have everything that you could possibly hope to have as a result. If you're not a believer and you're wrong, then you're in bad shape, right? Because of the things that you lose. If you're a believer and you're right, okay, well, you're in the best of positions as far as I'm concerned because of what happens after this life. But here's the thing. If you decide or choose to be a believer and you're wrong, lots of people argue there's no loss there, and that's incorrect. That's technically incorrect. Let me explain. The thing is, there are certain constraints or expectations on Christians that make it so that they can't live the sort of life that they necessarily would want to live if they were not believers, right? You can't. It's not a good idea as a Christian to drink to excess. It's not a thing to do as a Christian to indulge in fornication. It's not a thing for a Christian to do to be an Epicurean hedonist, right? To be a person who spends their time doing only things that they want to do, eating the finest of foods and so forth. It's not a thing for a Christian to do to gain wealth without it being a part of what one does to also work to give to others in need, right? Who actually will benefit from having of your substance. So the thing is, if you're a believer and you're wrong, there is no God, then you can argue that there is actually loss as a result. In fact, I think Paul the Apostle says as much in something that he says. I should have looked that up. I didn't, but the point is that I think even Paul the Apostle acknowledges that in a sense, if we're believers and we're wrong, we're not the sorriest of people exactly, but something in that vein. And I think there's something to be said for that idea. That having been said, though, the thing that you have to consider is this: where technically what is said there is correct, if we're not a believer and we're wrong, we're in the, well, regardless whether we're right or wrong, really, the loss is substantial, okay? Think about it like this. If there's a God and he gives us a life ever after, and that life, that eternal life that we have is lived in his greatness and in his kingdom, right? Doing things, wonderful things in his kingdom and in his ways, then as people in that situation, it's a wonderful thing. So if we're a believer and we're wrong, then what we actually lose in a way is greater yet. And I think this maybe was part of Paul's point, in as much as what we lose is not just what we lose on the earth, but what we lose, in fact, as a result of there not being a God, because that would be a wonderful thing. Even if you're not a believer, you sort of have to, I think you sort of have to acknowledge that fact. If you're not a believer, though, and you're right, where in a sense you sort of gain, right, because you get the ability to do the things that you want to do, you lose in a major way, because if God is who the people of who follow Christ believe he is, and the Jews believe he is, then he's an amazing God who does wonderful things for his people. If you're not a believer and you're wrong about that, well, now you're sort of even more at loss, because you have the opportunity to be a part of God's afterlife, if you will, and you chose not to do that. Okay, so that's kind of where all of this comes down. By the way, you might hear my son making a little bit of noise. He's up and about, and as anybody who watches me regularly knows, he likes to make a little bit of noise as he does various things that he does. He's a great kid, but that he will do. In any case, so the point is, where I think a lot of people get this wrong. I think they sort of get a couple of pieces of this wrong. By the way, you might too hear the rain. We're getting an interesting amount of rain this year. We did that last year too, so it's not too surprising that it's happening this year. I don't guess. I don't really know what's driving all of that. Not smart enough to answer. But all of that said, we're getting a bunch of rain, so you might hear that today, as well as my son. There he goes again. Anyway, but the point is that there are two considerations that I think a lot of people miss. If you're not a believer and you're right, if you're not a believer and you're wrong, if you're a believer and you're wrong, in all three cases, you miss that kingdom of God. You miss that after this life experience that you would have if you had been a believer and right. So the only real position in this, I think, is sort of Pascal's point. Maybe this is not the case, but it seems like a reasonable thing to me. I think this is part of Pascal's point, or was part of Pascal's point, is if you're a believer and you're right, the sacrifice in this current time on planet Earth while you're here is comparatively very small to the gain that you get as a result of believing and being right. Now, there's arguments for you can believe and be right and still not enter into the kingdom. That's absolutely possible, right? So the hope is that you follow through on your belief and so forth. And there's also the argument that says that you can't really be a believer of your own accord. And that's a kind of a mysterious belief, and I could go into the details, but I think it's a little bit more than we really have time for in this video, right? Because that's a pretty complex idea. Imagine the idea that you choose to believe in God, but God says, yeah, you believe, but the demons believe also and tremble, right? Put another way, that your belief isn't necessarily some sort of sign that you get to enter the kingdom of heaven and be a part of all that God has in mind for his people, right? So this is, it becomes a pretty complex thing. But here's the thing. If you're not a believer and you're right, I feel sorry for you. And I feel sorry for everybody else, because the kingdom that is presented, the God that is presented in the Bible is truly, you can look at things that he does and you can say, oh, it's horrible, whatever. You can do that if you want. You're allowed. But when you look in toto at the picture of that God, I can't imagine you coming to the conclusion you wouldn't rather have him be there. If you're not a believer and you're wrong, well, now you've gained in life, you can argue. I don't really believe you have, and I can make arguments against that. Again, we're not going to try to do that right now. But you've lost in the afterlife and what happens after this. If you're a believer and you're wrong, well, you've lost a little bit on the earth, but the bigger loss to me is what you've lost after this time that you leave the planet. If you're a believer and you're right, and you manage to make your way into the kingdom of heaven, you are in the best of worlds in my mind, even though you lose some things on this earth. That's a scant moment by comparison to eternity. So this is kind of where I'm going to stop for the day, okay? I appreciate the fact that you've been coming to visit me. I really like the fact that folks do that. I'm over 6,000 views, but still haven't reached that 7,000 point. I'm working hard to get to the 10,000 view point just on my videos in general, and haven't done that either to this point, but hopefully at some point we'll do that on my little daily summation videos that I do. I'm going to try and do another daily summation video again tomorrow. That'll be Monday the 1st of March of 2021, today being Sunday the 28th of February. As I've said, the subject of tomorrow's little video will be admitting fault, which is one that I had some things that happened recently that really pointed to the idea that maybe I don't even do that as well as I'd like to believe that I do. Again, I'm trying to keep myself down to 10 minutes, and I'm already over that. So hopefully you're having a good day. Hopefully you're having a good start of the week, Sunday being that for most folks, or for many folks. Tomorrow will be the start of the work week, and hopefully you'll have a good work week going forward. Also, it'll be the start of the month, so that'll make things kind of interesting for a lot of folks, myself included. I'll start to become a little bit busier in my work as things go on, and stop doing some of the less immediately significant stuff. Anyway, I don't want to get too much into detail on that because I'm already over 11 minutes today. So I hope you're having a good day. I hope you have a good tomorrow. I hope you have a good week, and hopefully we will see you again tomorrow. The speaker on this edition of the Daily Summation is Kurt Schubert. This video was recorded on Sunday the 28th of February of 2021. The Daily Summation is created for Kurt's Religion and Politics. Thanks for watching this edition of the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. I hope you found it entertaining or instructional, or maybe both. If you want to see more from me, you can go to blogs.kpschubert.com. That's blogs.kpschubert.com. I am on Twitter, Parler, and Minds.com. My handle on each of those is @kpschubert. That's @kpschubert. I have a Rumble and a YouTube channel. They are the Kurt's Religion and Politics channels on Rumble and YouTube. I have a Facebook page. The Facebook page is Kurt's Religion and Politics as well. I am on Patreon. If you want to support me, that's one of the better places you can do that. And you will find me at Kurt's Religion and Politics on Patreon. I have a podcast. The podcast is podcasts with an S, .kpschubert.com. That's podcasts.kpschubert.com. I think you should be able to find me with relative ease on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify as well. The best way I find to do that is to look for Kurt's Religion and Politics. You can try to use the Daily Summation. I find that it doesn't work as well as a general rule, but you can always try that. I'm glad to have you aboard today, and hopefully we will see you again tomorrow.